Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
In solidarity with the people of Belgium and the victims of the horrific attacks that have taken place in Brussels and also in Ankara in the last few days. We pay respect and tribute to all their families and friends, and we pay enormous respect to the emergency services of all denominations for the huge work that they've done to try and save life. We must defend our security and values in the face of such terrorist outrages and refuse to be drawn into a cycle of violence and hatred. We take pride in our societies of diverse faiths, races and creeds, and will not allow those who seek to divide us to succeed. My right honourable friend, the member for Lee, will be responding on behalf of the Labour Party to the statement that the Home Secretary will be making at 12:30. Can I also join the Prime Minister, Mr Speaker, in sending my deepest condolences to Mr Ismay's wife Sharon and his 3 daughters. The people of Northern Ireland made a profound choice to follow the path of peace when they widely adopted the Good Friday Agreement. The actions of an unrepresentative few should not be allowed to change the course supported by the overwhelming majority of people in Northern Ireland. Mr Speaker, on a different subject altogether, last week I got a letter from Adrian. He wrote to me saying, "I'm disabled and live in constant fear of my benefits being reassessed and stopped and being forced onto the streets." Could the Prime Minister do what the Chancellor failed to do yesterday and apologise to those that went through such anguish and upset during the threat of cuts in their personal independence payments?
Well, first of all, let me thank the right honourable gentleman for what he said both about the terrorist attacks in Belgium and also for what he said about Northern Ireland and the fact that we have achieved so much peace and progress in that valuable part of our United Kingdom. Turning to the issue of disability benefits, as I said in this House on Monday, when you are faced with having to take very many, very difficult decisions, including many spending reductions, as we were after becoming the government in 2010, you do not always get every decision right. I'm the first to accept that, to admit that, and on every occasion that happens, it's very important you learn the lessons. But as we do so, we will continue to increase spending on disability benefits, which will be £46 billion, more than £46 billion a year by the end of this Parliament, compared to £42 billion when I became the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, government figures published only this morning show the number of people with disabilities and homeless is now up by 39% since 2010. 300,000 more disabled people are living in absolute poverty. That's why people like Adrian are very worried. There has been big disarray in the Cabinet over the last few days. So can the Prime Minister now absolutely, categorically rule out any further cuts to welfare spending in the lifetime of this Parliament? Simply yes or no.
Well, let me respond to all the points he just made. I mean, first of all, he talked about the number of people in poverty. We've actually seen poverty fall over this Parliament. The second thing he referred to is the regrettable rise in homelessness, with figures out today, but homelessness is still 58% below the peak that it reached under Labour. I think that is important. Now, he talks about the number of disabled people, and this is a government committed to supporting the disabled, but it is worth making the point that in the last 2 years there are extra 293,000 disabled people who've got into work. And we want to continue, as we've set out in our manifesto, to close that disability gap. Now, as for the question about further welfare reductions, let me repeat the statement that the new Welfare Secretary made on Monday, the Chancellor made on Tuesday, and happy to make again. I dealt with these issues on Monday. I mean, if he doesn't ask the questions, he can't exactly... I turned up and gave the answers, even though he hadn't given the questions. But we're very clear, we are not planning additional welfare savings other than the ones that we set out in our manifesto and that are in train.
Corbyn.
Mr Speaker, my question was actually about the poverty of people with disabilities, which the Prime Minister did not answer. In his failure to explain how he would fill the hole in his budget left by the change of heart on PIP. The Chancellor said, and I quote, "We can absorb such changes." If it's so easy to absorb changes of this nature, why did the Chancellor and the Prime Minister ever announce it in the first place? Will he now listen and learn and withdraw the £30 per week cut to disabled ESA claimants, which his government is pursuing?
The changes to employment and support allowance have been through both Houses of Parliament, and it is important to note that employment and support allowance for the most disabled, that is the support group, are up by almost £650 a year under this government. We've increased the higher rate of attendance allowance, we've increased carers allowance, we've increased the enhanced rate of PIP, because we believe a strong economy should support the most disabled people in our country, and that's exactly what we've legislated to do. Now, if the right honourable gentleman wants to get on to discussing black holes, I say bring on the argument, because we inherited an 11% budget deficit from the Labour Party. And under this team of ministers and this Chancellor of the Exchequer, we have cut that deficit by 2/3 since we became the government. From Labour, all we've had is more proposals for more spending, more welfare, more taxes, more debt. All of the things that got us into the biggest mess with the biggest black hole in the first place.
Mr. Speaker, if it's all so fine and dandy, then the question has to be asked, why did the member for Chingford feel it necessary to resign as Work and Pensions Secretary, complaining that the cuts being announced were to fit arbitrary fiscal targets? He said they were distinctly political rather than in the national economic interests. In the initial announcement, he proposed cuts in PIPs, then changed his mind. Isn't the honourable member for Chingford right when he says this was a political decision rather than one made in the interests of people in this country?
I believe that after 7 or 8 years of economic growth, it is right to be targeting a surplus, because a responsible government puts aside money for a rainy day. I don't want to be part of a government that doesn't have the courage to pay off our debts and leaves them instead to our children and grandchildren. And that is the truth. What is dressed up as compassion from the party opposite just means putting off difficult decisions and asking our children to pay the debts we weren't prepared to pay ourselves. I don't know why. I don't know why the shadow leader of the House is shouting at me. Mr. Speaker, we've got a very interesting document today. We've got the spreadsheet of which Labour MP is on which side. The honourable lady is shouting, but it says here, no, she's neutral but not hostile. That's right. Now, the Chief Whip, on the other hand, the Chief Whip is being a bit quiet. Look, there are 5 categories, Mr. Speaker. But look, no. Mr. Speaker, there are 5 categories. We've got core support. I've got all day, Mr. Speaker. We've got core support. I think you can include me in that lot very, very strongly. We've got core plus. The Chief Whip's being a bit quiet because she's in hostile. Mr. Speaker, I thought I had problems.
Mr. Speaker, if I could invite the Prime Minister to leave the theatre and return to reality. The reality is that he has presided over a budget that unravelled in 2 days and now contains a £4.4 billion black hole in it. He may wish to consult the Chancellor on yet another change of heart on this matter. Could he now consult the Chancellor and tell the country who's going to pay for this black hole? Is it going to be cuts or tax rises? Where will the cuts fall? Where will the tax rises take place? £4.4 billion has to be found from somewhere.
Oh, suddenly the king of fiscal rectitude speaks. He may have noticed, the budget passed last night, and it's a budget that cuts the deficit in every year of this Parliament. It's a budget that delivers a surplus by the end of this Parliament, and none of that is going to change. He talks about this budget. I'll tell him, look, hold on. Look, the hostile, you shout, hostile shout, that's right. But neutral but not hostile, you have to be quiet, I think. Oh, hold on, no. I want to know, hands up who's Core Support Plus? Anyone else? I'll tell you what this budget did. It took 1 million people out of income tax. It saw more money for our schools. It helped the poorest people in our country to save. It cut taxes for small businesses. It cut taxes for the self-employed. It made our economy stronger. It made our country fairer. And it's a budget that will help this country do better.
Now, look, I want you to look at a graph. This one's from the IFS. We'll put it up here. On the left, the incomes of the poorest and how they're going to change with tax and benefit cuts over this Parliament. On the right, the incomes of the richest. So as you go from left to right, you're looking from the poorest to the richest. And the big downward bars are the percentage losses in net income. Now, what you basically see is that the poorest are losing sort of 5 to 8 or more % of their net income. The top people on the right, the richest, are losing almost nothing with the proposed taxes and benefit change. What do you make of that graph? You see, this is an IFS graph. It is describing what's happened in this Parliament. And in effect, shouldn't we worry that you in the Cabinet, who are nodding through these things, have not seen the most basic distributional analysis of what this government's plans are for this Parliament? I agree, you can go back to other parliaments, and the picture is, you know, more progressive. But this is what you're planning for this Parliament. It was never described that way. It was never set out as a, now we want to give back to the rich. I mean, but that is that we're all in it together? I didn't include that, but I could have put the living wage in, but actually the picture is very much the same.
That is a huge step for a compassionate Conservative government in terms of helping people to have a national living wage.
I could show you, it actually doesn't look very different if you put the living wage in. The Resolution Foundation have done it. They all look like this. And you, as a minister, Secretary of State, don't really even know that that's what the government is, because you're not being presented with that data.
Mr. Speaker, the truth is it was a budget that fell apart in 2 days. The truth is that many people with disabilities went through the most unbelievable levels of stress and trauma after the PIP announcement was made. There are many people who are still going through stress and trauma in our society. There are still... I'm not sure that those members... I'm not sure, Mr. Speaker, those members opposite that are shouting so loudly at the moment have any idea what it is like to try and balance a budget at home when you don't have enough money coming in, the rent is going up, and the children need clothes.
Order! There's too much shouting on both sides of the House. Stop it. The public are bored stiff by it. The Honourable Gentleman, will finish his question. We'll have an answer, but no shouting from members of any grouping. That's the message.
Budget has to mean something for everybody in our society, however poor and however precarious their lives actually are. This budget downgraded growth, downgraded wage growth, downgraded investment. The Chancellor's failed on debt targets, failed on deficit targets, as the official figures have shown. The fiscal rule is quite simply failing. The Treasury Select Committee scrutinised the government's fiscal rule. They couldn't find any credible economist who backed it. Can the Prime Minister find anybody that backs a budget and a policy that is a budget with a big hole in it and downgrades every single forecast that they set themselves before the budget was made?
Well, it's just a bit late because the budget passed through this House with large majorities on every single vote. Let me remind him This is a government that is spending more on the disabled than in any year under the last Labour government. We are spending more on the most disabled, including the most disabled children in our country. We've got more disabled people into work than ever happened under Labour. And what we see with this budget is the background of an economy that is growing, employment at a record high, investment that is rising, businesses that are creating jobs in Britain that is the envy of other European economies. And it's because we've got a strong economy that we're able to provide this support. That is what you can see: Britain getting stronger and the Labour Party a threat to the economic security of every family in our country.
That's all, folks.